In December of 2022, the BBC posted an uncharacteristically charming and rather endearing story about a group of delivery robots forming an orderly line in Cambridge. At 7:30 on a Tuesday evening, a cyclist came upon a row of 7 little black and white delivery robots queuing patiently, waiting to cross Coleridge Road. She took a photo of the darling little starship robots, which soon went viral on the Odd Things Around Cambridge Facebook group. The cyclist, Miss Davis, noted that one of the robots had even politely asked a passerby if it would please press the crosswalk button for them. Apparently, after the lights changed, the parade of robots began to safely cross the street. Comments on the post included things like, "Cute," or "They look so sad waiting on the curb." People found the whole story quite sweet, amusing, and ultimately very British. Even our robots like to stand quietly in line. But what if those robots weren't darling little lunchboxes on wheels, asking sweetly for help across the road, but rather humanoid, lifelike robots with hands and feet and faces? Faces that, although are like ours, are stiff, waxen, devoid of life. Would a line of 7 stoic life-size robots with vacant eyes and soulless bodies be cute? Would this line of wax and metal figures be a fun oddity? Or would it be absolutely terrifying? That brings us to the concept of the uncanny valley. The uncanny valley was a theory proposed by a Japanese professor and roboticist in the 1970s. Masahiro Mori hypothesized that there is a link between how human something looks and how much of an emotional response we have to it. It explains why things that have human characteristics can look appealing and adorable, but why things that look human but not quite can make us feel uncomfortable. Think of the difference between Disney's WALL-E and the recent horror film, Megan. WALL-E is cute because although he has human-like features, he is still definitely not human. Megan, on the other hand, is scary because she leaps past the valley and looks close to human, but something isn't quite right. And as real humans, we respond to that with heightened levels of discomfort. The reason wax figures, robots, and CGI characters can give us the creeps is because although they are very much like us, it's the subtle differences that make it feel so very wrong. And nothing, and I mean nothing, has more of a legacy of terrifying people than dolls. Tiny little versions of humans, perfect little innocent cherubs with perpetual frozen smiles and beady soulless eyes. Dolls can be whatever or whoever we want them to be. They are blank slates that we imbue with personalities, emotions, and desires. But sometimes, that psychological projection can also cross the valley and turn into an altogether different beast. We are back, and my cauldron is overflowing with new stories, chilling folklore, and secrets reserved especially for our West London Witch Coven. There has never been a better time to join the West London Witch Patreon, a space full of exclusive content, extra episodes, coven conversations, and not one, but 2 audiobooks read by me in video format. Joining Patreon is fun, easy, and affordable. For as little as £1, $1, €1 a month, you're not only unlocking our entire Patreon catalog, but your support is also keeping the cauldron bubbling and the magic burning. So join us today at patreon.com/The West London Witch. Hello and welcome to the Season 6 premiere of The West London Witch, a podcast where we share stories about those moments where we find ourselves very much not alone. I am delighted to be back with you all after our summer break. This was an explosive summer in the paranormal community, and the internet was alight with hot gossip and drama revolving around famed ghost hunters, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now, we don't cover internet drama on this show. We are a long-form narrative storytelling podcast. But this situation was so prolific, even my mother, who is very much not in the paranormal space, reached out to me regarding stories that she had heard about a haunted doll. In 2013, the world was introduced to Annabelle. In the first Conjuring movie, Annabelle is a terrifying porcelain doll who comes to life and terrorizes her owners. The story was so compelling, there was a film trilogy based off of the doll's lore. However, this summer, in May of 2025, an alarming story hit the news. Annabelle the doll, a doll so cursed and dangerous, she is fortified in a glass box locked up to protect the public, was going on tour. The tour was ominously named the Devil's on the Run Tour. Coincidentally, this tour coincided with not only the Nottoway Plantation fire, but also the New Orleans jailbreak, both of which, thanks to the internet, were attributed to Annabelle. Now, if that wasn't juicy enough for online enthusiasts, in July, things took a tragic turn. On July 13th, 2025, Dan Rivera, a paranormal investigator and member of NESPRA, the New England Society for Psychic Research, the group in charge of Annabelle, died unexpectedly in his hotel room in Gettysburg while on the Devil's on the Run tour. Of course, once again, Annabelle was suspected. However, the police established the cause of death as natural causes. But the coincidence was just too spooky. This story was so sensational, so confusing, and so very popular. I reached out to Chris McKinnell, Ed and Lorraine Warren's grandson, for some clarity on not only Annabelle's origin story, but also her future. I'm Rebecca Strazina, and this is The West London Witch. Episode 96, Annabelle, with Chris McKinnell.
We will start trouble because I'm disowned from my family for speaking out against this. Annabelle, right now, everybody's talking about it because it's on tour. And notice I'm saying it, not she. Why don't we talk about the real story behind Annabelle?
Our story begins in 1970 with 2 young nursing students at Hartford Hospital in Connecticut. The 2 women were living together, sharing an apartment, and beginning their professional lives, like so many other young Americans across the country.
One of them, their mother had bought this secondhand Knickerbocker Raggedy Ann doll. And the girls loved it. This thing was about 3 feet tall. And they would sit it at the kitchen table with them. They would talk to it. They would play with it. They would sleep with it. They really babied it for some reason. And then one day, the doll's arms levitated up onto the table. Now, you have to remember the times. All right, this was the age of Aquarius. Everything's cool. Everything is positive energy. And they thought, ooh, there must be a spirit in the doll. Let's have a seance. One of the girls knew a medium, supposed medium, and they did a series of seances. Now, this would be one of the first times I realized that we can't trust psychics without evidence. I'm a psychic. I don't trust me without validation and verification. I've seen my grandmother make mistakes, and she was the best, but she was also the one that told me the best psychic in the world is only right 60% of the time. So during this series of seances, the supposed medium came up with this story that a little girl named Annabelle Higgins had been killed near the property. Now, if you have read The Demonologist, I believe it says she was killed before the property was even built. If you're listening to my grandfather talk about it, you're hearing him say she was killed by a car in front of the house.
This is our very first discrepancy in the Annabelle origin story. It is important to note that the 1980 biography entitled Demonology, that details the career and the cases of the Warrens, was not written by Ed and Lorraine, but rather by an author named Gerald Brittle. Gerald Brittle was also responsible for writing the 1983 novel The Devil Made Me Do It, a book that covered the Arnie Cheyenne Johnson case, a case that we dove deep into in episode 62, Sentencing Satan. That book is alleged to be full of factual inaccuracies and conflicting stories. It's not too shocking that Ed and Gerald's accounts differ. This could be due to a litany of different factors that we will frankly never know the answer to, as both the Warrens and Gerald Brittle are now deceased. However, this murky start only adds to the confusion of the greater Annabelle narrative.
After this idea that this little girl had been killed and was just looking for somebody to love her, those 2 nursing students with complete compassion in their hearts adopted her. Now it's a little girl named Annabelle Higgins, and they buy it a bracelet. They are always taking it with them. They're treating it like a little girl. And when they have to go to work, they say, have a good day, sweetheart. We love you. And they're feeding it all of this wonderful love. But then the doll starts acting like a little girl. It plays hide and seek. When they come home, the doll's not where they left it. And they're getting a little creeped out. And then the doll starts leaving messages on parchment paper, which is an old-fashioned type of paper that they didn't own, and with crayon, which they didn't own, saying things like, want to play? Miss me? Help me. As time went on, those messages got a little darker because they felt watched and they felt afraid. Their energy started to change. And as they changed, the doll changed. They were feeding it energy. They were manifesting something.
So what was happening? Had the ghost of a little girl come to embody the doll? Was it a demon? Or was it a spirit masquerading as a child in need of love? Or was it something altogether different?
Now, I've tried to explain this before, the idea of egregores and tulpas. A tulpa is a spirit created by one or two individuals' energy. They concentrate that energy, they create a spirit which has real power, real essence, and can really do things. And then it goes out, performs that, and because it was created consciously, it then dissipates when the job is done. But when it isn't done consciously, things get out of control. It can take on a life of its own. This is where we get the idea of poltergeists sometimes. It's also where I believe we get the idea of demons. These are things that I see manifest all over the world, but always by our cultural and spiritual beliefs.
Chris believes that a tulpa or thought form manifestation led the Annabelle doll to seemingly come alive. The love, the focus, the attention, and the concentration the women showered upon the doll had the power to give it personal agency.
One afternoon, one of the boyfriends of the girls was sleeping on the couch, and he woke up and he said, I just was dreaming that Annabelle was on top of me, choking me to death. He got up, he walked to where Annabelle was sitting in a chair, picked it up and said, "You're just a stupid doll. You couldn't hurt anybody," and threw it across the room. As soon as he did that, all hell broke loose. According to my grandfather, the chair the doll had been sitting in shot across the room. Banging was happening in the walls, and the lights were going on and off. And then the young man was clawed across the chest. They immediately called a local priest, I believe Lutheran, in Hartford, Connecticut. That priest happened to know my grandparents. My grandparents agreed to go into the house immediately with the priest. And you need to understand, my grandparents were Catholic. Yes, they were open to other religions. They would work with any religion. But my grandfather was a religious demonologist. When he looked at things, he always looked at them through that lens. I think it's a myopic view. I think if you're going to examine this phenomena, you cannot do that through one religion. You have to have a more broad view. My grandmother, also being very, very Catholic, she felt these very negative, heavy energies. Now, my grandfather believed there was no way God would allow the spirit of a little girl to possess a doll.
Ed Warren was really into the idea of demons and demonic possession. He has been highly criticized for his narrow approach, and even Chris disagrees with this limited viewpoint. However, there does seem to be a shade of demon cast over a lot of the Warrens' work.
From that moment, that very day, they said, "It's a demon." And the girls were like, "Oh, please take it away. We don't want it." That was it. My grandparents brought it home.
According to Chris, that was it. There were no attacks, no chaos, no broken bones or houses spontaneously combusting. Just two women giving up a doll that scared them. Not really an exciting enough plot for a Hollywood blockbuster, but a very creepy doll nonetheless. Annabelle went back to the Warrens' home museum, where Chris says the activity did continue to grow and evolve.
There were no incidents on the way home, as far as I'm aware. My grandparents never spoke of any incidents. Now, there was one time they were out on Route 84 in Pennsylvania. It's another quiet highway, at least in Pennsylvania it is. And they had been doing a lecture tour in places like Paradise and Bethlehem. They were, not necessarily doing lectures there, but they were driving through these biblically named towns. And my grandfather took notice of that. He made a joke. It was the mid to late 70s. And he said, "Man, not even Annabelle or Amityville to bother us here." And as soon as they said that, they felt something smash into the back of their car like they'd been hit. The car spun out of control and went into a ditch between the two roads. There was a truck driver about a quarter of a mile down behind them. He pulled in, of course, to help. And he said he swore it looked like somebody had hit them, even though there was no other car on the road. My grandfather always said he learned not to joke about Annabelle. The problem is, because they now labeled it demonic, they empowered it even further. Names have power. We shape reality. And now Annabelle is deadly. It has tried to kill people. There was a friend of ours, Father Bill Charbonneau, back in about 1974. He came over to the house. He was this young, hip priest. I loved the man. He's no longer with us, which is why I feel I can share this story. He had a brand new car. He wanted to show it off to his friends. And afterward, he said to my grandfather, "Ed, I hear you've got this doll that attacks people." And my grandfather said, "Yes, Father. It's downstairs. Would you like to see it?" Now, this was before Annabelle was in a box with prayers and holy water and blessed salt. It was sitting in a rocking chair. Father Bill walks right up to it, picks it up, says, "God is stronger than the devil," and throws it across the room. And my grandfather just looked at him, scared, and said, "Yes, Father, God is stronger than the devil, but no man is." That night, Father Bill was driving home on Route 8 in Connecticut. It's a very quiet highway, very quiet. And he saw this white light come out of the sky directly at him. And just before he veered off the road, he swears he saw Annabelle in the halo of the light. The car went into the median, was ripped in half, and his leg was broken.
These scary stories are not outliers. There are loads of terrifying tales connected to this doll. But here comes our next wave of confusion. Which stories are real? Which ones are sensationalized? And which ones are flatly untrue?
I could tell you other stories. One I will tell you right up front is not true. It's a story of a young man taunting Annabelle. He came there to the museum on his motorcycle with his girlfriend. My grandfather's talked about this. My grandfather, after hearing the taunts, said, "Get out. You're crazy." And the boy was killed when Annabelle appeared in front of him, smashing into a tree. That's not true. There's no evidence it ever happened. I know, again, one of the people from Nesper claims he saw the accident as a young man. I'm hesitant to use the word, but he's lying. The truth is, I believe, I don't know for a fact, my grandfather used to talk about Father Bill's story, but Father Bill did not want him to talk about it any longer, didn't want him to be included. So my grandfather changed the story. He was trying to warn people about how dangerous Annabelle is, and he embellished.
This is not the first time Ed Warren has been accused or suspected of exaggerating or being loose with the facts. Ed and Lorraine have both been highly criticized for their portrayal of their work on every major case they have touched, from Amityville to the Conjuring House to the Enfield Demon House here in London. The question, of course, is why? What's the motive for dramatizing the facts? Some say they were grifters, con men, exploitative monsters. And others think that in order to share their work, put across their message, they needed to embellish in order to get the word out to the masses. Even Chris does not truly know why his grandparents altered their stories.
I never understood that tendency. The truth is, I've lived these cases with my grandparents, and they're deadly. Sometimes the details are actually worse than what he shared. So it was always interesting to me to see him talking about something I had lived in a way that wasn't perfectly accurate. And again, I'm not disparaging my grandparents. They were my heroes and I love them. But they were also trying to get a message across about evil and not toying with these things. But there was one other story. My grandmother used to help the police on cases. And one detective had come to the house. And after speaking with my grandmother, he wanted to see the museum. And my grandfather loved the police. And so he goes down with him and he's showing him around. And then my grandfather had to take a phone call and he said, look, you're welcome to stay down here. Just don't touch anything. Well, my grandfather went upstairs to take the phone call. And within minutes, the detective a big guy comes stumbling up the stairs, white as a sheet. He would not tell my grandfather what had happened. But he said he would tell my grandmother as long as she swore to never tell anyone ever again. And she never did. My grandfather, though, went down to the basement in the corridor down to the museum. And the whole place had been torn apart like a tornado had hit it. And the case with Annabelle in it had been opened. He knew immediately what had happened. The detective was fascinated by the doll. He had walked over, he had opened the doll case, and as soon as his energies interacted with that doll, all hell broke loose.
A huge part of Ed and Lorraine Warren's legacy is their haunted museum, a veritable paranormal treasure trove of artifacts collected from the Warrens' work as ghost hunters.
Everybody wants to visit this museum of theirs with Annabelle. It wasn't a museum. It's the one thing about their legacy that drives me nuts. It was a prison. It was never open to the public. It was meant to be a place to protect you from those things.
Now, let's talk about this museum, because it is a huge part of our story today. If you're imagining the Smithsonian full of shrunken heads and spooky voodoo dolls, think again. If you're like me, you might picture the museum as a dark, dank, and spooky basement space. And it is, kind of.
My grandparents had an art studio outside of the main house. And over time, they started putting items in there. And then over more time, they created a corridor that connected from the basement of the house to the art studio. It's a creepy, creepy corridor. You'd go down the corridor, which had all of the paintings that my grandparents had painted of hauntings they'd been involved with. And then you come into the museum. And at first, Annabelle was just in a chair down there.
Annabelle may have started her tenure in the museum sitting in the corner in a chair, but over time, she would be confined to her pine and glass prison, kept safely away from the public. That is, until this summer. You see, after Ed and Lorraine Warren both passed, their home and the museum were left to their only child, Judy. Judy is married to a man named Tony Spira, and together they run the New England Society for Psychic Research, more commonly known as NESPRA. Chris has nothing to do with his grandparents' former home or collection, and the situation is a bit, shall we say, fraught. I do not make it a habit of asking storytellers their personal family backgrounds, but in this case, with the internet gossip running rampant, I did set the stage for Chris to share his perspective. That does lead me into some rather sensitive family dynamics, which you don't have to get into, but how did we get to a point where Tony is in charge of this collection and managing it? Was the museum open when your grandparents were alive, or was that something that he was in charge of? What is the dynamic here, if you don't mind?
For people who don't know, Tony Spera is not my father. My mother was married twice. There's so much bad information on the internet. Some of it says that Tony and my mother never had any children. That's correct. Others say that they had 2 children. That's incorrect. At the end of my grandmother's life, Tony and my mother were the ones taking care of her, making sure everything was fine. Tony had been helping with the slideshow presentations with my grandparents. He was the one there changing the slides. They didn't make a lot of money back then, and my grandparents were trying to help. Then my grandparents started doing classes, I guess you'd call them, and Tony would be there as well. He also had been on their closed circuit television, public access television talk show called Seekers of the Supernatural. He was the presenter. This was what Tony loved. He loved being in the public eye. I had been in my early 20s. I did Geraldo and all of these other talk shows, and I did college lectures, and I was in 3 of my grandparents' books, and I was like, I don't like this. This isn't for me. I went quiet, and he didn't. He took over when my grandfather had his heart arrhythmia and lost his mind. He started helping doing lectures. My grandmother, being my grandmother, wanted to please my mom. They had often had difficulties through life. So she made sure that everything would go to them. My grandma had asked, what do we all want? I had said I wanted a cuckoo clock, the family photos, and 1 painting. But my mother and Tony had convinced them that they would make sure everybody got what they wanted. And so my grandmother, making it easy for herself, just gave it to them. That's why they have it.
Do they own the house as well?
Yes.
So they own the house and the collections, and they are sole proprietors of what happens with it.
I have no legal right to question where anything goes. Everybody's been suggesting that I have some kind of lawsuit or whatever. It's like they can do what they want with their property. I have no control over that, but I can speak up.
Chris is right. The Speras can do whatever they like with their property and possessions. And this summer, a massive bombshell dropped. In August 2025, major news hit the paranormal community. Comedian Matt Rife, along with YouTuber Elton Castee, purchased the Warrens' former home and museum. As a result, the pair are now the legal guardians of the entire haunted collection, Annabelle included. This news created mass hysteria in the paranormal space. This was when my own mother, who knows nothing about the paranormal world, came to me asking if the rumors were true. The news was so massive that on August 30th, Tony and Judy weighed in on the drama. According to a Facebook post, the Speras clarified that although they sold Ed and Lorraine Warren's home and the building the museum is contained within, they did not, in fact, sell the artifacts. According to the couple, they could no longer afford their own home and personal expenses as well as Ed and Lorraine Warren's former abode. So, they teamed up with Matt and Elton, who bought the property and are now leasing the artifacts for at least the next 5 years. The plan, according to Matt and Elton, is to open up the home as a paranormal Airbnb, so guests can visit the home for overnight investigations. The artifacts, which are being leased, are said to eventually be moved to a new location in order to be displayed and open to the public. Nesper will oversee the care and maintenance of the collection. This move has come with no shortage of criticism. This decision has provided a solution for Tony and Judy's personal financial challenges, but it has sparked massive controversy. Heated debates regarding the ethical handling, public safety, and Ed and Lorraine Warren's own wishes have all come under question. The involvement of a comedian and a YouTuber has drawn serious skepticism. Is this move motivated by preservation or commercial gain? And of course, there is Chris's main concern: safety.
The truth is, once Annabelle was locked down, people were safe until now. The other issue that I have with this doll being on tour right now, there are an awful lot of psychologically vulnerable people. You go into those places where you believe there are cursed objects, even if it's not the real Annabelle. And I can't say one way or the other if it is. If it's not, it's fraud. But even if it's not, if you believe it is, it's just as deadly to you. And you can cause yourself harm believing the doll has instigated that. So I think it's irresponsible. I think it's a craven money grab. My family is never going to speak to me again. I'm the black sheep of my family because I will not support this. They have everything. They have all the money they could ever want. I have literally nothing. I've got about $200 in the bank. I'm content. I'm happy. I don't need those things, and I'm not going to allow their desire for fame and fortune to imperil the public. So that's why I'm speaking up.
However, playing devil's advocate, there are those who support the move. A 5-year lease of the artifacts ensures there is a way to protect the items if the arrangement doesn't work. Essentially, there is an out. Also, if the spirits cannot afford to care for the home and the artifacts, this deal offers a sustainable path for both the home and the collection to be suitably cared for and preserved. This avoids potential loss or damage due to neglect. And of course, a lot of the public love the idea of being able to visit and see this home for themselves. The transparency and renewed public engagement is exciting for a lot of paranormal enthusiasts. Realistically, this could be a very reasonable and pragmatic solution to a very complex situation. But Chris maintains that this was never his grandparents' intention. He believes that the home and the collection were never meant to be a public attraction. Chris has no feelings personally about Matt Rife and Elton Casti, but rather fears for their safety. Chris says his intention is merely to warn the public that energies in this place can be deadly. However, Matt has stated that he will care for the property and the artifacts with care and responsibility. I have reached out to all parties involved, yet have had no reply. And to be fair, Matt and Elton have made their position very clear. They are paranormal enthusiasts who look forward to sharing this space and these items with others. But I guess the real question is, why does anyone care about this drama? How did this become such a viral moment? Well, of course, there is the power of pop culture. Annabelle came to life before our eyes in the Conjuring movie franchise and its subsequent spin-offs. Audiences feel as though they know the doll. The uncanny timing of the tour, the fire at Nottoway Plantation, and the prison break in New Orleans, coupled with the death of Dan Rivera, is truly spooky, tragic, and downright eerie. Are there too many events for this just to be a coincidence? Sure, rumor and speculation have fanned the flames, but I think the real root of the quote-unquote drama is really fear. One can't help to ask themselves, what if? What if something as seemingly innocuous as a child's toy could cause real harm, destruction, and even death? The reality of the situation is that Annabelle has transcended her reputation as a creepy doll. She sits at the perfect intersection of folklore, urban legend, horror movies, family drama, and internet culture. She is now a symbol, and what she represents is perfect for online virality. Perhaps that's Annabelle's new frontier.
Annabelle is what started out as a tulpa, which, by the way, is a Tibetan Buddhist term. It took on a life of its own, it gained power, and it became something called an egregore. An egregore is a spirit that is maintained through the collective belief of many people. The movies were not a great idea. They have made this thing very powerful. Now that Annabelle's on tour, people are freaking out. And there are so many stories. I remember during COVID, there was a rumor that had gone around that Annabelle had escaped the museum. Well, that rumor is back again, and I've been trying to put out these fires. Do not ascribe godlike powers to this thing. It did not start a plantation fire 60 to 80 miles away from where it had been in New Orleans. It did not help a bunch of convicts escape from prison. That was actually a bunch of other insiders like sheriffs, deputies, and so forth who are being charged now. Treat Annabelle like a cobra. You don't get too close, you learn how to deal with it properly, and you protect yourself.
The home is sold. That is done. The collection will be open to the public. But what does the future of that collection look like? Well, I asked Chris, and the answer was a little heartbreaking. So you have absolutely no way of knowing what's going to happen with this collection, who they give it to in a will or an inheritance, or what their plan is for it. There's no way you could possibly know that.
I can guarantee it won't be me. They do not want me in their lives any longer. My mom loves me, but she is angry and heartbroken that I'm speaking out, and that is not going to be resolved because I'm not going to stop being who I am. I am the black sheep of my family. I am diametrically opposed to the way they live, and they don't like the way I live. That's the dynamic of my family, which they're going to be very upset about because they are very private. But this was the situation I was put in.
Regardless of any of Annabelle's supposed paranormal harm, it is clear that this haunted collection has done very real damage to the Warrens' descendants. And that is a real-life horror story. But what if you're interested in visiting the home? Well, according to the new Haunted Warren House website, for 100 nights, the house will be open for overnight bookings. The cost? $2,000 a night. And if you would like to post content about the home on social media, you can expect additional fees ranging from $200 to $500. All content must be approved by Matt and Elton. The website claims the home contains over 750 haunted and demonic objects and personal, never-before-seen items of Ed and Lorraine's. Provided on the site is a ghost hunting toolkit valued at $25,000, drinks, snacks, bedding, and my favorite amenity, holy water. So what do you think? Head on over to the West London Witch Facebook and Instagram and let me know your thoughts. If you'd like to engage in further discussion, why not join us on Patreon, where there is an additional exclusive interview with Chris, where he tells us all about his involvement in the Smurl case, the topic of the final Conjuring movie that has just been released. It's a phenomenal view into the case from someone who is actually there. Join us at patreon.com/ The West London Witch. Do you have a spooky story you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Drop me an email at thewestlondonwitch@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at The West London Witch. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And come and follow us for additional content on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. The West London Witch is created by me, Rebecca Strazina. Our sound designer and production magician is the incredible Danny Cross. Our theme music was bespokely written and performed by the wickedly talented Kyle Hall. Our cover art is the beautiful collaboration between Lizzie Wilson and Jake Bowser. Special thanks to Miss Sinead Bowers, our quality control and biggest cheerleader. And thank you to you, all of our listeners all over the world. These are your stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.